A 1915 studio photograph was discovered, and historians were shocked by the symbol carved into a chair. The soft afternoon light streamed through the tall windows of the Philadelphia Museum of American History, throwing long shadows across Elena Rodriguez's desk. She had worked there as a curator for almost 10 years, focusing on colonial-era objects, and she believed very little could surprise her anymore. But when a cardboard box arrived that Tuesday morning, along with a handwritten note from an elderly woman named Dorothy Callahan, Elena had no idea her life was about to change. Inside the box, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, was a single photograph. The image was sepia-toned, its edges slightly worn, yet amazingly well preserved for something dated 1915. Elena lifted it toward the light, her breath catching as she studied what it showed. It was a formal family portrait taken in what looked like a refined parlor. A dignified man sat in an ornate wooden chair, his posture proud and confident. Standing beside him was a woman in a high-neck lace dress, her hand resting softly on his shoulder. Around them were 3 children, 2 boys in matching sailor suits, and a girl in a white pinafore dress with ribbons in her hair. Everything about the scene suggested wealth and elegance. Behind the family, Elena noticed details of the room. Persian rugs covered the floor, oil paintings hung in gilded frames, heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows, crystal chandeliers reflected the light, and polished mahogany furniture gleamed. This was clearly a family of great means, captured in a moment of comfort and success. But it was the chair that held Elena's attention, the chair where the father sat with such clear pride. She reached for her magnifying glass, her hands shaking slightly as she brought the photograph closer. The chair was remarkable, even by the standards of wealthy homes in 1915. It appeared to be mahogany, with a rich grain visible even in the old image. The arms were carved with fine detail, and the legs showed graceful curves shaped by expert hands. Then she noticed something that made her heart race. Focusing on the back of the chair, she adjusted the magnifying glass until every detail was sharp. Carved into the wooden crest, directly behind the man's head, was a symbol she had seen only once before in her studies of American constitutional history. It was a half-sun, with rays stretching upward above a horizon line. "It can't be," Elena whispered, her thoughts racing. She set down the magnifying glass and picked up her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found Dr. Marcus Williams, the museum's top expert on 18th-century American furniture. Her finger hovered for a moment before she pressed call. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Elena, what's going on, Marcus? I need you to come to my office right now," she said, unable to hide the excitement in her voice. "I think I found something impossible." "Impossible? How?" Elena looked down again at the photograph, at the wealthy family posed so carefully, at the man sitting on something that should not exist. "I think I'm looking at the rising sun chair in someone's private home." Marcus Williams arrived within minutes, his gray hair slightly messy from rushing through the museum halls. At 63, he had spent his entire career studying American furniture, and Elena knew he was the one person who could confirm or deny her suspicion. "Show me," he said, a little out of breath. Elena handed him the photograph and the magnifying glass, watching his face closely as he examined the image. She saw his eyebrows lift, then knit together, then lift again. He moved the magnifying glass slowly, studying every detail of the carved chair beneath the seated man. "Where did you get this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "It was donated this morning by a woman named Dorothy Callahan," Elena replied. "Her note said it belonged to her family. She found it while cleaning out her attic." Marcus set down the magnifying glass and walked to the window, staring out over the city. "You know what this means if it's real, don't you?" Elena nodded. "It means a replica of the rising sun chair was in someone's private home in 1915, and no one ever knew about it. The original rising sun chair was one of the most important objects in American history. George Washington had used it during the Constitutional Convention of 1787 at Independence Hall, only blocks away from where they stood now. The chair's carved sun had become a symbol of hope and new beginnings for the young nation. Benjamin Franklin had even written about it, saying that during the convention he wondered whether the sun was rising or setting, and that after the Constitution was signed, he knew it was a rising sun. The original chair still existed, carefully preserved at Independence Hall behind protective glass, but the idea that someone had ordered a private replica and displayed it so clearly in a family portrait was completely unknown to historians. "Look at how he's sitting," Marcus said, returning to the photograph. "This isn't casual. He's positioned to show off that chair." The photographer made sure the carved sun was visible. This was done on purpose. Elena studied the image again and saw that Marcus was right. The man sat perfectly centered, the camera angle highlighted the chair, and even the light seemed to fall on the carve. Ed back. This family wanted that symbol to be seen. "We need to find out who these people were," Marcus said, "and we need to know why they had this chair." Elena picked up Dorothy Callahan's note again and reread the shaky handwriting. A phone number was written at the bottom. "I'll call her this afternoon." "Do it now," Marcus urged. "If this is real, it changes everything we thought we knew about that chair and what it meant to private citizens." Dorothy Callahan's voice was thin but steady on the phone, carrying the weight of 92 years. She lived in a small row house in the Fishtown area, about 20 minutes from the museum. When Elena asked if she could visit that afternoon, Dorothy agreed right away. "I've been wondering if anyone would care about that old picture," she said. "My children wanted to throw it away when we were cleaning, but something told me to keep it." Elena and Marcus arrived just after 3 o'clock. The house was small but spotless, with lace curtains in the windows and a tiny front garden where late autumn flowers still bloomed. Dorothy opened the door herself. She was petite, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and sharp blue eyes that noticed everything. Come in," she said, leading them into a living room filled with family photographs. "Can I get you some tea?" "That would be lovely, thank you," Elena replied, even though she was eager to begin asking questions. As Dorothy went into the kitchen, Elena noticed a framed photograph on the mantel. It showed a young woman from the 1940s smiling in a wedding dress. Another nearby showed a man in a military uniform from the same time. Dorothy returned with a tray of tea and cookies and settled into an armchair with a contented sigh. "Now," she said, "you want to know about that photograph?" "Yes, please," Elena said, opening her notebook. "Can you tell us who these people are?" Dorothy reached for the photograph Elena had brought. She touched the glass gently, a soft, sad smile crossing her face. "That's my great-grandfather, William Hartley. He was a banker here in Philadelphia, very successful. The woman beside him is my great-great-grandmother, Catherine. The children are their 3, William Jr., Robert, and little Elizabeth." "Do you know when this was taken?" Marcus asked. "Spring of 1915, Dorothy replied. "My grandmother Elizabeth, the little girl in the picture, told me about that day. She said they had to sit perfectly still for nearly an hour while the photographer set up his equipment. She was only 7 and wanted to move, but her mother warned her to behave." Elena leaned forward. "Dorothy, do you know anything about the chair your great-grandfather is sitting in?" Dorothy's expression shifted, becoming more careful. "My grandmother mentioned it once. She said it was her father's most treasured possession, but she never really knew why. After he died in 1932, the chair disappeared. No one in the family knew what happened to it." "Did she ever say where he got it?" Elena asked gently. Dorothy was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the photo. "She said it was a gift from someone important, but she was just a child then. And by the time she was old enough to ask questions, her father was gone and her mother refused to talk about it." Marcus glanced at Elena. "Dorothy, would you mind if we looked into your great-grandfather's background?" he asked. "We might find records that explain where the chair came from." "Please do," Dorothy said. "I'd like to know the truth before I die." The next morning, Elena stood in the archives of the First Pennsylvania Bank, which had absorbed several smaller banks over the years, including Hartley and Sons, where William Hartley had built his fortune. The archivist, a careful woman named Patricia Hang, had pulled out dozens of boxes with records from the Hartley business. The Hartleys were important in Philadelphia banking from 1880 to 1933, Patricia explained, setting down a heavy ledger. William Hartley Sr. founded the bank, and his son William Jr. took over after his death. The bank failed during the Depression, like many others, but the family had other investments and stayed fairly comfortable. Elena worked through the papers one by one. Bank statements, investment files, letters with other banks. It was all interesting history, but nothing explained the chair. Then, in a box marked Personal Correspondence, 1910 to 1920, she found something unusual. A letter dated February 1915, written on thick paper with an embossed letterhead reading, Harrison Family Trust, Philadelphia. Elena's pulse quickened. She recognized the name from her research into Philadelphia's wealthy families. She read the letter carefully. It thanked Mr. Hartley for his discretion and financial skill in managing a trust created for a special commission project. It spoke of the creation of a replica that required master craftsmen and a patron who understood it. Symbolic meaning. It said the chair would be delivered to his residence as a sign of appreciation, with a request that it be preserved with care and secrecy. The letter was signed Jonathan Harrison III. Elena leaned back, her mind racing. William Hartley had not simply owned a replica of the Rising Sun chair. He had helped make it happen. He had handled the finances, supported the project, and received the chair as a reward for his silence. She called Marcus immediately. "I found the link," she said. "Hartley managed the money for creating the replica. The Harrison family ordered it, but Hartley funded it and got the chair in return." "That explains why it was in his house," Marcus said. "But it doesn't explain what happened to it after 1932. "I know," Elena replied, looking at the many documents still waiting. "But I'm going to find out." For the next 3 days, Elena buried herself in records, tracing the Hartley family after William's death in 1932. The Great Depression had scattered their property, and their mansion near Rittenhouse Square had been sold in 1934 to a manufacturing firm. The building later became offices and eventually luxury apartments, but nowhere was there any mention of furniture being sold or moved. Marcus suggested finding descendants of the Hartley children. With Dorothy's help, Elena located Robert Hartley's grandson, a retired professor named David Hartley living in Boston. She called him that evening. At first, David was doubtful, but when Elena described the photograph and mentioned the chair, his voice changed. "My father told me about that chair," he said quietly. "He said his grandfather valued it above everything. When the old man died, his children argued over who should have it. My grandfather Robert wanted it, but his older brother William Jr. said it belonged to him as the eldest." "What happened?" Elena asked. "My father said Elizabeth, the daughter, settled it. She was only 24, but she was the smarts. T of them. She convinced her brothers the chair was too valuable and too important to stay with one person. She said it should be kept somewhere safe, where it could be protected." Elena's heart pounded. "Do you know where she took it?" "My father said she gave it to someone she trusted completely," David replied. "Someone who understood its importance. But he never said who. He said Elizabeth made the whole family promise never to tell where the chair went. She feared someone might try to steal it or say it belonged to the government." Elena thanked him and ended the call, then began researching Elizabeth Hartley. Unlike her brothers, she had not gone into banking or business. She became a historian and preservationist and was one of the founding members of the Philadelphia Historical Society. The answer hit Elena like a bolt of lightning. If Elizabeth cared deeply about preserving history and needed to hide something priceless, where would she put it? She grabbed her coat. "Marku." S. looked up from his desk. "Where are you going?" "The Philadelphia Historical Society," Elena called back. "I think Elizabeth Hartley hid the chair in plain sight." The society was housed in a beautiful 19th century townhouse in Society Hill, just blocks from Independence Hall. Elena had visited many times but never thought to look for anything linked to the Hartleys. The head archivist, James Chen, greeted her warmly the next morning. When Elena explained her search, his eyes widened. Elizabeth Hartley was one of our most important early donors, he said, leading her down to the basement archives. She gave us many items in the 1930s and 1940s. She had a strong interest in Revolutionary War objects and early American furniture. The basement was a maze of climate-controlled rooms filled with artifacts and documents. James stopped at a section labeled Hartley Collection, Restricted Access. Restricted? Elena asked. James nodded. Elizabeth placed special conditions on some items. Some were not to be displayed, others were not to be examined without permission, and one item was to stay sealed until a certain date. Elena felt her breath stop. What date? James checked a large binder and found the entry. Here it is. Item H237, mahogany chair, 18th century style, donated in 1935. Sealed by donor request. Not to be opened or examined until January 1st, 2025. That's next month, Elena whispered. James glanced at the calendar hanging on the wall. Given that it was already late November, he realized they were only about 5 weeks away from the date written in the records. He explained that the item was kept in their secure vault in the sub-basement. Can we see it? Elena asked, barely allowing herself to hope. James paused for a moment. Officially, we are meant to wait until the exact date, he said. But considering the historical importance you've described, and how carefully you traced its history, I think an exception can be made. I'll get the keys. They went down another level into a windowless room with reinforced walls and a massive steel vault door. James entered the combination, and the door opened with a soft hiss as air escaped. Inside were shelves filled with labeled boxes and several large items covered in protective cloth. James checked his inventory list and walked to the far corner. There, under a canvas covering, stood a large object shaped like a piece of furniture. Item H237, he said quietly. Together, Elena and James slowly removed the canvas. The rising sun chair stood before them, its mahogany surface glowing gently under the vault's LED lights. Nearly 90 years of careful storage had kept it in perfect condition. The carved sun on the back seemed to shine on its own, just as it had in the photograph from 1915. Elena reached out, her fingers shaking as she touched the smooth wood. This chair had witnessed history, not the events of 1787, but another kind of history. It told the story of a wealthy Millie's pride, of a secret commission, and of a daughter wise enough to protect what her father cherished. Hidden in a carved recess beneath the seat, Elena discovered an envelope marked to be opened with the chair. Inside was a letter written in Elizabeth Hartley's hand, dated 1935. Elena sat on a small stool inside the vault, with James Chen standing beside her as she carefully unfolded the letter. The paper was still firm, and the ink had hardly faded. Elizabeth's words flowed in elegant handwriting made with a fountain pen. The letter began by introducing herself as Elizabeth Hartley, daughter of William Hartley, writing in the autumn of 1935 while the nation struggled through its worst economic crisis. She wrote that her father had died 3 years earlier, leaving her not only part of his estate but also the weight of a secret he had carried for nearly 20 years. She explained that the chair was a perfect replica of the rising sun chair used by President Washington during etched Constitutional Convention of 1787. Her father had not ordered it himself, but had helped make it possible through his work as banker and trustee for the Harrison family, who began the project in 1915. Elizabeth described how she had been only 7 years old when the family portrait was taken with her father sitting in the chair. She remembered how proud he was that day, how carefully he positioned himself, and how he insisted the photographer capture the carved sun behind his head. At the time, she did not understand why a chair mattered so much. Years later, when she was old enough to ask, her father explained its meaning. Jonathan Harrison III had ordered the replica as an expression of faith in America's future during the dark years of the Great War in Europe. She wrote that the original rising sun chair symbolized the birth of the nation, the moment when Benjamin Franklin decided the sun was rising, not setting. Harrison wanted a second chair to exist as a private reminder, The sun was still rising, even in troubled times. Her father, who managed the finances and kept the project secret, received the chair as payment for his discretion and his belief in American ideals. After her father's death, Elizabeth explained she and her brothers disagreed about the chair's future. William wanted to keep it on display in the family home. Robert wanted to sell it to a collector. Elizabeth believed both ideas were wrong. The chair represented more than family pride or wealth. It stood for the shared faith of two men, Harrison and her father, in the lasting promise of American democracy. She believed it deserved to be protected, not as a private object, but as a symbol of that belief. She had donated it to the Philadelphia Historical Society on the condition that it remain sealed for 90 years until 2025. By then she hoped enough time would have passed for people to understand what the chair truly was. Not a fake or a forgery, but a deliberate act of history. Preservation created by skilled craftsmen during a time of global uncertainty. She ended by expressing hope that whoever opened the vault would understand what the chair meant and would see, as Benjamin Franklin had, that the sun is always rising if people have faith enough to believe it. The letter was signed Elizabeth Hartley, October 15, 1935. Elena finished reading, her voice heavy with emotion. James stood quietly beside her, clearly moved. She wasn't hiding it, he said at last. She was protecting it, waiting for the right time. Elena nodded as she carefully folded the letter. And now, she said softly, that time has come. With the chair and Elizabeth's letter now revealed, Elena returned to an earlier question. Who had actually built this remarkable piece? The 1915 photograph showed the Hartley family, but not the craftsman behind the work. She went back to Dorothy Callahan with new questions. She asked if Catherine, Elizabeth's mother, had ever mentioned who made the chair or where it came from. Dorothy thought for a long while, tapping her fingers on her teacup. Then she said there might be something. She asked Elena to wait and went into her bedroom, returning with a small wooden box. Dorothy explained that after Elena's last visit, she kept thinking about other stories her grandmother had told her. Before her grandmother died, she had given Dorothy the box, saying it held letters from her own mother. Inside were dozens of letters, neatly tied with faded ribbons. Dorothy admitted she had never read them all as they felt too personal, but hoped Elena might find something useful. That evening, Elena read through Catherine Hartley's letters. Most were ordinary notes, invitations, and letters to friends. Then she found one dated August 1915, written to Catherine's sister. It described how pleased William was with the chair that had arrived the month before, saying it represented everything he believed about the country. Catherine wrote that the craftsmen who made it had come to the house to check that it survived the journey. She described them as fascinating men, all immigrants, one from Ireland, one from Italy, and one from Russia. They spoke little English, but their pride showed in everything they did. She mentioned that the Italian craftsman, Mr. Rossi, had cried when he saw the chair in their parlor, calling it the finest thing he had ever made. William had paid them well and sworn them to secrecy, saying some things were too precious to announce to the world. Elena's hands shook as she finished reading. She now had names. The chair had been built by Thomas Brennan, Giovanni, Rossi, and Jacob Friedman. With these names, she could trace their lives. The following week passed in a rush of research. Elena searched immigration records, city directories, and family histories. Slowly, the lives of the three master craftsmen came into view. Thomas Brennan arrived from County Cork, Ireland in 1889, escaping poverty and limited opportunity. He learned carpentry from his father and opened a successful workshop in Philadelphia by 1900. Giovanni Rossi fled economic hardship in southern Italy in 1895, bringing with him generations of woodcarving knowledge. Jacob Friedman escaped religious persecution in Russia in 1902, arriving in Philadelphia with nothing but his tools and his skill as a furniture maker. These three men, along with others whose names were lost, combined their talents to create something extraordinary. They studied the original Rising Sun chair at Independence Hall, took careful measurements, chose the finest mahogany, and carved every detail with patience and precision. They created a chair identical to the original in every way, working in secret, knowing their masterpiece would be hidden in a private home instead of a museum. Elena was deeply moved by their story. immigrants who expressed their gratitude to their new country through their craft. 3 months later, on a cold morning in January 2025, the Philadelphia Museum of American History prepared to open one of the most important exhibitions in its history. Elena had worked endlessly to bring everything together. The replica chair was borrowed from the Historical Society. The 1915 family photograph, Catherine Hartley's letters, Elizabeth's 1935 letter, Harrison family documents, and immigration records of the craftsmen were all displayed. The exhibition was titled Two Suns Rising: The Secret History of America's Most Symbolic Chair. Media attention was intense. National news covered the story, historians debated its meaning, and thousands requested tickets for opening day. Marcus Williams stood beside Elena in the gallery an hour before opening. Both were exhausted but thrilled. The exhibition guided visitors through time, beginning with the 1787 convention and Benjamin Franklin's famous words, then moving to 1915, where the replica chair sat in a special case lit to match the Hartley parlor. The family photograph was enlarged so every detail could be seen. The walls told the full story, from the commission to the craftsmen to Elizabeth's decision to preserve the chair. The final section explored what it meant that private citizens cared so deeply about national symbols. Dorothy Callahan arrived early with family members. Though she moved slowly, her eyes shone with pride. Elena walked her through the exhibition. Dorothy paused before the photograph. "I wish Grandmother Elizabeth could see this," she said softly. "She would be proud. She made it possible." Elena replied. When the doors opened, crowds poured in. Elena watched people read, whisper, and stand in wonder before the chair. One elderly man stood crying quietly. He approached Elena and said his grandfather was Giovanni Rossi. He thanked her for telling the story. Elena hugged him, understanding that this story mattered not only to history, but to families. 6 months later, Elena stood in Independence Hall, invited to speak to park rangers. The original rising sun chair sat behind its barrier, glowing in the afternoon light. Elena spoke about faith, symbols, and preservation, about how private citizens in 1915 believed the sun was still rising. Afterwards, she walked slowly through the hall, thinking about the journey that began with an old photograph. The replica chair now lived in the museum, drawing crowds and starting conversations about history, identity, and belief. As evening fell over Philadelphia, Elena walked past Independence Hall toward the museum. The real sun was setting, painting the sky gold. Tomorrow it would rise again, just as the chairs continued to ask their quiet question. The answer, Elena believed, was always the same. The sun was rising as long as people chose to believe and work to make it so.